Show me the research. That's probably what a lot of you are thinking when I say the optimal way to train is 1, adequate duration set with high intensity of effort to failure. Well, that's what I'm going to do for you today. I'm going to go through some research by some well-recognized, well-respected exercise scientists and a couple of meta-analyses comparing dozens and dozens of scientific studies on muscle hypertrophy and improvements in strengths. I'm going to show you what they found, and I'm going to prove to you that 1 set 2 muscle failure with a high intensity effort is the optimal way to train. So what I'm going to go over today is a meta-analysis called, well, it's pretty much a meta-analysis called Evidence-Based Recommendations for Training for Muscle Hypertrophy. Now, this study was done by James Steele, James Fisher, and let's see who else here. Dave Smith. James Fisher is a PhD exercise scientist from Solent University. James Steele is also a PhD exercise scientist from Solent University in the UK. And Dave Smith, Manchester Metropolitan University. 3 exercise scientists compiled dozens of studies. And what they wanted to do is come up with some evidence-based recommendations for how you should train to maximize muscle hypertrophy. So the areas they are covering are intensity of effort, load and repetition range, repetition duration and rest intervals, volume and concurrent resistance and endurance training, range of motion, contraction types and resistance types, non-uniform muscle growth, contralateral effects, and training and detraining time course, and of course, training status and genetics. So these are the categories that they subdivided this plethora of exercise science literature to find evidence-based recommendations how you should approach training if you want to maximize muscle hypertrophy. So right now, what I'm going to go over is intensity of effort and whether or not intensity of effort plays a role in stimulating muscle growth and how much of a role it plays in stimulating muscle growth. I think you're going to be surprised at what the study came up with when they compared all of the adequate scientific literature and found whether or not training intensity matters. So let's take a look. So as you can see here, these are the topics they subdivided all the research into in terms of stimulating muscle growth and approaches to doing so. What we're going to go over right now is this: intensity of effort. What did they find? What about intensity of effort actually matters for stimulating muscle growth? So it begins right here. The intensity of effort has previously been considered to be perhaps the single most influential controllable variable for enhancing muscular strength. And based on the size principle, or referred to as Henneman's size principle, sequential motor unit recruitment, it would appear that training to momentary muscle failure maximizes enrollment of muscle fibers to catalyze adaptation. So they considered 2 studies in using electrical stimulation of contractile muscle contraction. They found that the muscle that received exercise stimulation, therefore more motor unit recruitment and activation, received higher increases in hypertrophic gains. So, as said here, it reported significant increases in muscle cross-sectional area for the group performing electric stimulated isometric knee extension exercises. So what they found was, as you may know, electrical stimulation will involuntarily recruit more motor units and more muscle fibers, that the group which had more muscle fiber recruitment and more motor unit recruitment received better muscle gains, better gains in muscular growth. Now we know physiologically that training to momentary muscle failure recruits more motor units than not training to momentary muscle failure.
We also know that the amount of effort put forth into training is responsible for how many motor units are recruited. So it seems evident, based on the comparison of these studies, that training with a higher intensity of effort and training to momentary muscle failure will therefore recruit more motor units. And as we can see, when more motor units are recruited, the result is more improvement in hypertrophy.
So based on what James Steele, James Fisher found by comparing these studies is that it's evident that intensity of effort and more favorably training to momentary muscle failure is going to recruit more motor units, and more motor unit recruitment results in a better stimulus and more growth in your muscles. That is why I recommend training to momentary muscle failure. But when you're training to failure and training with a high intensity effort, you have to be very careful about the volume and frequency with which you train. And in the next video, I'm going to go into the recommended volume and frequency for optimizing muscle growth, considering that they are implementing a high intensity of effort. So doing set after set after set, just moving the weight up and down and not training with effort and not training with intensity and not training to failure is suboptimal for improvements in muscle size. The volume training approach is suboptimal for improvements in muscular strength and size based on a compilation of the most relevant literature. If you want to optimize improvements in muscle strength and muscle size, you need to train very intensely because that is going to result in more motor unit recruitment. More motor unit recruitment is going to result in more muscle growth.